My son dragged me to court, seeking control of my $18 million estate and custody of my grandchildren. You'll never see those kids again, you senile old fool, he sneered, his words cutting through me like ice as he stood before the judge. Utterly devastated, I retreated to the isolated mountain property my late husband Eli had purchased years ago. While cleaning the dusty cabin, I discovered a safe concealed behind an antique stove. The combination was my birth date. Inside lay a letter that began, "If you're reading this, the moment of truth has finally arrived. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment that changed everything forever. My name is Eleanor, though everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 67 years old, and until 3 months ago, I genuinely believed I had a family who loved me. My husband Elijah passed away 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving behind a sprawling $18 million estate in Buckhead, Atlanta, along with several flourishing businesses. I thought my son Brandon, a successful 42-year-old attorney, would be my rock during my golden years. How utterly wrong I was. It all began when Brandon arrived with his wife Tiffany and their 8-year-old twins, Ethan and Zoe. I was blissfully content living with my grandchildren. I looked after them while their parents worked, prepared their favorite meals, and took them to the park every weekend. "Mom, we need to have a serious talk," Brandon announced one October afternoon, his tone sending chills down my spine. Tiffany stood beside him in a crimson dress I'd always found too revealing, wearing an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Has something happened?" I asked, pouring coffee in my cherished living room, the very space where Eli and I had spent countless evenings discussing our dreams and plans. "We've been observing you closely, Mom. Lately, you've been exhibiting some concerning behavior. You forget things constantly. You repeat the same conversations. You've left the stove burner on multiple times." I froze. While it was true that occasionally I misplaced my keys or retold a story, that happens to everyone my age, it certainly didn't mean I was losing my mind. "Brandon, those are just normal age-related memory lapses. Your father experienced them at my age too," I replied, striving to maintain my composure. But Tiffany leaned forward, those calculating eyes that had always unsettled me now fixed firmly on mine. "Eleanor, yesterday you gave the children ice cream for breakfast. The day before that, you forgot to pick them up from North Atlanta Academy. The principal had to call us." That wasn't true. I would never forget my precious grandchildren. But before I could defend myself, Brandon dropped the bombshell that would shatter my entire world. "Mom, we've consulted with several medical specialists. We believe you're showing early signs of Alzheimer's disease. This house is far too large for you to manage alone, and the children, well, they can't be placed in danger." The words pierced me like daggers. Alzheimer's. Danger. What was my own son talking about? "I don't understand, Brandon. I feel perfectly fine. I've been caring for these children since they were born. I would never, ever hurt them." Tiffany and Brandon exchanged a look that broke my heart into pieces. It was the look of two people who had already reached a decision without any input from me. "That's precisely why we've decided the best course of action is for you to move into a premium assisted living facility," Brandon continued. "We'll need to sell the house to cover your care expenses, and the children will remain with us permanently." My world collapsed in that instant. My home, the one Eli and I had built together with so much love, the one that contained 40 years of precious memories, they wanted to sell it and take Ethan and Zoe away from me forever. "Absolutely not, Brandon. This is my house, and those are my grandchildren too. I'm not going anywhere." But my son was no longer the loving child I had raised. His eyes hardened in a way that frightened me to my core. "Mom, you can either cooperate, or we can pursue this through legal channels. The choice is yours." That threat marked the beginning of the end. In the weeks that followed, Brandon hired physicians who confirmed his false diagnosis. He presented testimonies from neighbors who allegedly witnessed me behaving erratically and systematically, he stripped everything away from me. The day of the court hearing became the most humiliating experience of my entire life. Sitting in that frigid courtroom, listening to my own son describe me as a feeble-minded, dangerous elderly woman, I felt my heart being torn to shreds. The trial unfolded like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. I sat in the cold courtroom, watching my own son destroy my reputation, word by devastating word. Brandon wore his finest black suit, the very one I'd purchased for his birthday last year. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tiffany sat in the gallery wearing a shimmering gold dress that sparkled under the fluorescent lights, as if this were a celebration rather than my living funeral. "Your Honor," Brandon began in that professional voice I had once been so proud of, "my mother, Eleanor Hayes, displays clear signs of advanced cognitive decline. She can no longer safely live alone in that $18 million mansion without posing a danger to herself and to my children." Tears streamed down my cheeks. How could he say such things about me? Me, who had raised him single-handedly after Eli worked 18-hour days building our empire. Me, who had stayed up countless nights caring for him through every fever and illness. Me, who had sold my own jewelry to pay his law school tuition. I present to this court the testimony of Dr. Silas Thorne, a specialist neurologist who evaluated my mother last week. An elderly man rose and approached the witness stand. I had never seen him before in my life, yet there he stood, deciding my future with words I never imagined I'd hear spoken about myself. "After a comprehensive evaluation," the doctor stated in a monotone voice, "Mrs. Hayes presents symptoms consistent with early-stage senile dementia, frequent forgetfulness, temporal disorientation, and episodes of confusion that could jeopardize both her safety and that of any minors under her care." "That's a lie!" I shouted, jumping to my feet. I have never met that doctor in my entire life. The judge banged his gavel sharply. "Ma'am, please maintain your composure, or I will be forced to have you removed from this courtroom." My attorney, a young, inexperienced lawyer who cost me barely $5,000 because Brandon had frozen all my accounts, gently grasped my arm. "Mrs. Hayes, please sit down. This outburst isn't helping your case." But how could I remain calm while listening to lie after calculated lie? Brandon continued presenting his fabricated evidence, testimonies from neighbors who claimed to have seen me talking to myself in the garden. The truth was I had been speaking to Eli, visiting his memory while watering the roses he had loved so dearly. "Your Honor," Brandon said, producing a thick folder, "I also present photographs of my mother's home. As you can clearly see, there are obvious signs of neglect and disorder that confirm her inability to maintain a safe household." The photographs were passed around the courtroom. I recognized my kitchen, but it looked filthy and chaotic, as if someone had deliberately ransacked it. My living room was cluttered with stacks of old newspapers. My bedroom had clothes strewn everywhere. "Those photographs are manipulated," I whispered desperately to my lawyer. "My house has never looked like that." But no one was listening. Brandon had orchestrated everything with chilling precision. Then came the worst part. Brandon approached the stand, and with fake tears glistening in his eyes, tears that turned my stomach, he began his final performance. "Your Honor, it deeply pains me to be here today. I love my mother dearly, but my children, Ethan and Zoe, deserve to grow up in a safe, stable environment. Last month, my mother forgot to pick them up from school. They were found alone at 7 o'clock at night, crying because they thought we had abandoned them." "That's a lie!" I shouted again. I would never do that to my grandchildren. But Brandon continued his rehearsed performance. "Last week, she gave them adult medication, believing it was vitamins. We had to rush them to the emergency room to have their stomachs pumped." Every word felt like a knife plunging into my chest. My own son was fabricating horrific stories about me to steal my inheritance. Tiffany also testified, using that sweet, false voice she employed at family gatherings. "Eleanor has always been a wonderful mother-in-law, but lately she's changed dramatically. Yesterday, she asked me the same question 5 times in a row. The day before, she didn't recognize the children for a moment. It's truly heartbreaking to see her deteriorate like this. Lies. All calculated lies. But the judge believed every word. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he nodded attentively as he absorbed every fabricated testimony. When my turn came to speak, I rose with all the dignity I had left. "Your Honor, I raised that man sitting right there," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I worked alongside my husband for 40 years to build everything we have. I have never, not once, placed my grandchildren in any danger. I love them more than my own life." My voice broke as I gazed at Ethan and Zoe's innocent faces in the gallery, unable to comprehend why their grandmother was crying in this strange place filled with serious-faced adults. Brandon was my pride and joy. I sent him to the finest universities. I paid for his law degree. I supported him when he established his own firm. And this is how he repays me. By inventing illnesses, I don't have to strip away what my husband and I built through decades of sacrifice. But my words sounded like the desperate ravings of an unbalanced elderly woman. Brandon had planted seeds of doubt, and now everything I said seemed to confirm his version of events. The judge deliberated for barely 20 minutes. 20 minutes to destroy an entire lifetime. After reviewing all the evidence presented, he declared in a solemn voice, "This court determines that Mrs. Eleanor Hayes is not in a condition to properly administer her assets or maintain custody of minor children." The gavel fell like a thunderbolt. Legal guardianship and asset administration are hereby granted to Mr. Brandon Hayes, and permanent custody of the minors, Ethan and Zoe, is placed under his full responsibility. The world stopped spinning. Brandon stood triumphantly, embracing Tiffany as if they'd won the lottery, because that's exactly what they had done. They had won $18 million through lies and deception. I approached my grandchildren before they could take them away from me forever. "Grandma loves you so, so much," I whispered, hugging them desperately. But Brandon roughly pulled me away. "Get away from my children. You've already done enough damage." And then came the phrase that would haunt my nightmares forever. "You'll never see those kids again, you crazy old fool," he hissed, just loud enough for only me to hear, but with a cruelty I would never forget. I walked out of that courthouse completely shattered, without a home, without my grandchildren, without family, without anything. I left that building like a ghost. My legs trembled so violently I could barely walk. People stared at me with pity as I dragged my feet down the cold corridors that had just witnessed my public humiliation. Brandon and Tiffany emerged behind me. He wore an expression of pure satisfaction that turned my stomach. She carried Zoe in her arms while Ethan walked hand in hand with his father. My grandchildren, the babies I had helped raise, who knew my lullabies by heart, who had always run into my arms whenever they saw me. "Bye, Grandma!" Ethan shouted, trying to wriggle free from Brandon's grip to run toward me. But his father held him firmly. "She's not your grandma anymore, son. Remember what we explained. The lady is very sick and can't take care of you anymore." Tears completely blinded me. "Brandon, please. They're my grandchildren too. Don't do this to me." But he kept walking as if I were invisible. Tiffany cast me one final look, and for a fleeting second, I saw something in her eyes that chilled my blood. It wasn't sadness or compassion. It was pure triumph, as if she'd been waiting years for this exact moment. My lawyer approached me with a defeated expression. "I'm deeply sorry, Mrs. Hayes. We did everything we could, but the evidence against you was overwhelming." Evidence? It was all fabricated. Brandon invented every single word. "I know, but legally we couldn't prove it. Brandon is an exceptionally skilled attorney. He's been preparing this case for months, possibly even years." Those words hit me like a sledgehammer. Years. That meant my son had been plotting to rob me far longer than I'd ever imagined. The following days were absolute hell. I had 1 week to remove my belongings from the mansion that had been my home for 40 years. 1 week to pack an entire lifetime into cardboard boxes. Brandon didn't speak a single word to me throughout the entire process. He hired a moving company to pack my possessions as if I were a complete stranger. I wandered through those memory-filled hallways, touching the walls where Eli and I had hung family photographs, where we had marked Brandon's height each year as he grew. "Ma'am," the moving supervisor asked me, "what should we do with this antique furniture in the basement?" I descended the stairs to see what he meant. In a dusty corner stood the first pieces of furniture Eli and I had bought as newlyweds: a wooden table he had repaired with his own hands, chairs we'd painted bright yellow together one Sunday afternoon. "Leave them," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I don't have room for memories anymore." But Brandon appeared behind me with that coldness that had become so familiar. "Take everything. I don't want a single item of hers remaining in my house." His house. It was my house. The house Eli and I had built brick by brick. The house where Brandon was born. Where he took his first steps. Where we had celebrated every single one of his birthdays. "Brandon, please, just let me keep a few photographs of you as a child. Some memories of your father." He looked at me as if I were an irritating insect. "I already told you, I don't want anything of yours here. This house requires a deep cleaning after years of your negligence." Negligence. I had maintained that house immaculately for decades. Every corner had always gleamed. Every garden had been perfectly manicured. But now Brandon was describing it as if it had been a neglected hovel. Tiffany appeared at the top of the basement stairs wearing tight jeans and a pink blouse that looked far too youthful for her 35 years. "Honey, the interior decorators are here. They want to begin remodeling the main living room." Remodeling. Not even 3 days had passed since they'd seized the house, and they already wanted to erase every trace of my existence. "Wait," I begged them. "At least let me say goodbye to the grandchildren properly. I haven't been able to explain what's happening." Brandon laughed with a cruelty I had never known him capable of possessing. "Explain what? That their grandma is mentally unstable? We've already explained everything to them. The children understand that you require specialized medical assistance." "I'm not unstable, and you know that perfectly well." "The doctors say otherwise, Mom. Now please finish packing and leave. The children become frightened when you get hysterical." Hysterical? That word wounded me more deeply than all the lies during the trial. Me, someone who had always been calm and thoughtful, who had resolved every family crisis with patience and love. Now I was hysterical for defending my home and my grandchildren. That night, I stayed in a cheap hotel near the airport. I had nowhere else to go. Brandon had frozen all my accounts for my own protection, according to the judge's order. I only had the cash I kept in my wallet for emergencies. I sat on that hard, uncomfortable bed, surrounded by boxes containing the few personal items I'd managed to salvage, and I cried harder than I had since Eli's death. But these weren't tears of grief over a natural loss. These were tears of betrayal, disbelief, and a wound I knew would never fully heal. The next day, I remembered the Blue Ridge Mountain Retreat. Eli had purchased that property 20 years ago when we dreamed of retiring to the countryside. It sat about 2 hours from the city on 12 acres of land surrounded by mountains. We'd visited only a handful of times because we were always consumed with business matters, but Eli had kept it because he said that someday it would become our refuge. Perhaps Brandon doesn't even know it exists, I thought with a flicker of hope. I hired a taxi that cost me $200, money I truly couldn't afford to spend, but I had no other option. The driver regarded me curiously as he loaded my boxes into his trunk. "Moving to the country, ma'am?" "Something like that," I replied, unwilling to explain my tragedy to a stranger. The drive passed in silence. I stared out the window as the city receded into the distance, taking with it everything that had been my life until that devastating moment. The skyscrapers gave way to modest houses, then open fields, and finally the mountains surrounding Eli's property. When we arrived, my heart sank. The place looked utterly abandoned, as if no one had set foot there in years. The main house was modest compared to the mansion, but it possessed a rustic charm that Eli had adored. The wooden walls were badly faded, the windows were fogged with grime, and the yard was completely overrun with weeds. "Are you absolutely certain you want to stay here, ma'am?" the driver asked, seeing the discouragement written across my face. "Yes, I'll be fine here," I lied, paying him and watching as he drove away down the dusty trail. I was left utterly alone in that absolute solitude. The silence was deafening after so many years of city living. The only sounds were the wind whistling through the trees and the distant chirping of birds. I opened the front door with the key Eli had always kept hidden under a broken flower pot. The interior smelled of dampness and years of neglect. Furniture covered with white sheets looked like ghosts in the gathering gloom. Everything was blanketed in a layer of dust so thick that my footsteps left visible prints on the floor. The first night was absolutely terrible. There was no electricity. Brown, rust-colored water sputtered from the pipes. Every sound made me jump in fear. I lay on an old mattress I found in the main bedroom, clutching the only photograph I'd managed to save, Eli and me on our wedding day. "What would you have done in my place?" I wondered aloud, feeling his absence like physical pain. I spent the following days cleaning obsessively. It was the only thing I could do to prevent myself from truly losing my sanity. Cleaning gave me purpose. It made me feel useful when my entire world had lost all meaning. It was the 5th day, while scrubbing the kitchen with what little strength I had remaining, that something changed forever. I had been cleaning since dawn, desperately trying to keep my mind occupied to avoid thinking about Ethan and Zoe. I wondered if they missed me, if Brandon had told them I was dead, if they would ever understand the truth about what had happened. The kitchen was small but cozy, with wooden cabinets Eli had installed with his own hands. I remembered coming here on weekends, and him insisting on cooking for me, preparing those enormous breakfasts he claimed would give me energy for mountain hikes. I was cleaning behind the old stove when I noticed something peculiar. The stove seemed to have shifted slightly from its original position. There were marks on the floor showing where it had previously sat, and now it was positioned a few inches to the right. "That's odd," I thought. Eli had always been so meticulous about everything. I attempted to move the stove to clean more thoroughly behind it, but it was far too heavy for me. I found a broom and used it as a lever, pushing little by little until I managed to shift it far enough. And then I saw it. There, embedded in the brick wall, was a small but extremely sturdy safe. The metal gleamed as if it had been recently installed, contrasting sharply with the aged walls of the kitchen. My heart began pounding so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. Why would Eli have secretly installed a safe? What could he have been keeping hidden that he hadn't told me about? The safe featured a modern digital panel, completely out of place in that rustic kitchen. It appeared to be the type that opens with a 6-digit numerical combination. I stood before it for several minutes, trying to process what I had discovered. Eli and I had never kept secrets from each other. We had shared everything, the bank accounts, the important documents, all major business decisions. Why would he have concealed this from me? Perhaps he was planning to tell me and died before he could, I thought, feeling guilty for doubting him even for a moment. But curiosity proved stronger than anything else. I needed to know what was inside. I started with obvious combinations. First, I tried our wedding date, 061582, June 15, 1982. Nothing happened. Then I tried his birth date, 122,353, December 23, 1953. That didn't work either. I tried Brandon's birthday, 081181, August 11, 1981. The panel flashed red, indicating an error. I sat down in an old chair in the kitchen, staring at the safe as if it were an impossible riddle. What combination would Eli have chosen? He had been a man of routines, of numbers that held special significance for him. Then I remembered something he had told me countless times during our marriage. Eleanor, you are the most important thing in my entire life. The day you were born was the day the universe decided to bless me. With trembling hands, I entered my birth date, 031557, March 15, 1957. The panel flashed green, and I heard a metallic click that echoed through the silent kitchen. The door opened slowly, revealing the safe's interior. Inside were several carefully folded documents, a small voice recorder, and what appeared to be a thick manila envelope. The first item I removed was a letter with my name written in Eli's unmistakable handwriting. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped it as I unfolded the pages. My dearest Eleanor, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and something terrible has happened. If the moment of truth has arrived, it's because Brandon has finally shown his true colors. I sat down abruptly. Brandon showing his true colors? What did that mean? Eli had died 2 years before Brandon sued me. How could he possibly have predicted what would happen? I continued reading with my heart racing wildly. For the last 5 years of my life, I discovered things about our son that broke my heart into pieces. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to destroy the image you had of him. But now that I'm not here to protect you, you need to know the complete truth. The truth. Brandon had been an exemplary son. A bit distant in recent years, perhaps, but always respectful, always successful. Eleanor, Brandon is not our biological son. The letters blurred before my eyes. I read the sentence once, twice, 3 times, but the words made absolutely no sense. What did he mean Brandon wasn't our son? I had given birth to him. I was in the delivery room. I felt every single contraction, every ounce of pain. I know this will shock you as profoundly as it shocked me when I discovered it. Brandon is the son of Tiffany and another man. Tiffany was already pregnant when she met Brandon, but he never knew. She convinced him the baby was his. My world began spinning. Tiffany met Brandon only 10 years ago, long after Brandon was born. How could she possibly be his mother? But then I understood. The Brandon mentioned in the letter wasn't my Brandon. It was another Brandon. A man Tiffany had deceived years ago, making him believe he was the father of a child that wasn't his. I continued reading desperately. I discovered this entirely by chance 5 years ago when I hired a private investigator to thoroughly check Tiffany's background before our son married her. What I found absolutely chilled me to the bone. Eli had investigated Tiffany. That explained why he had never fully accepted her into the family, even though he had always been polite and cordial toward her. Tiffany has a documented history of failed marriages, all involving substantial sums of money. Her first husband was an elderly, wealthy, but terminally ill businessman. He died under highly suspicious circumstances exactly 2 years after they married. He left her a considerable inheritance that she squandered in less than a year. Her second husband was Paul Jennings, a young, successful attorney remarkably similar to our Brandon. Tiffany became pregnant almost immediately after marrying him, but the investigator discovered she had been conducting an affair with another man for several months. When Paul Jennings requested a paternity test, Tiffany disappeared with the baby. My breathing quickened dramatically. Tiffany had fled with a baby who wasn't her husband's child. Eleanor, that baby is the one we now know as our grandson, Ethan. Tiffany changed both her last name and the child's. She moved to another city and completely started over. When she met our Brandon, she fabricated an elaborate story about being a single, widowed mother. It couldn't possibly be true. Ethan and Zoe, my beloved grandchildren, weren't actually my grandchildren at all. But the letter continued relentlessly. Our Brandon fell head over heels in love with her and legally adopted the child as his own. He never knew that Tiffany had specifically targeted him because he shared the same name and profession as the child's real father. Tears began falling onto the paper, staining the ink. Everything was beginning to make horrifying sense. The way Tiffany had always seemed to be calculating something in her mind. How she had insisted that Brandon legally adopt the child. How she had always regarded me with that strange, unsettling expression. But the absolute worst of it, my love, is what I discovered next. My hands trembled violently as I turned to the next page of the letter. Eli had uncovered something even worse. I braced myself mentally for the next blow, though I didn't know if my heart could withstand any more devastating revelations. Tiffany didn't merely deceive Brandon about the child's paternity. She has also been systematically poisoning him against you since the very moment they married. I have found concrete evidence that she has been planning to seize our entire fortune for years, deliberately poisoning his mind against me. I recalled all those subtle changes in Brandon that I had noticed but had attributed to the normal stress of marriage and fatherhood. How he had gradually started questioning my decisions, suggesting I was aging poorly, insinuating that perhaps I needed professional help. I found recordings of conversations between Tiffany and a close friend of hers where they meticulously plan, step by step, how to manipulate Brandon into declaring you mentally incompetent. Tiffany knows corrupt physicians who are willing to sign absolutely any diagnosis for the right price. The air left my lungs completely. Tiffany had orchestrated everything from the very beginning. Every doctor who testified against me. Every false witness statement, every piece of fabricated evidence. I also discovered that Tiffany has been subtly drugging you during family dinners for the past 2 years. Small, carefully measured doses of medication that caused temporary confusion and memory loss. That's why you sometimes felt strangely disoriented after visiting them. I remembered those evenings at Brandon's house when I would feel inexplicably dizzy after dinner, when Tiffany would insist I have a second cup of coffee for better digestion. How I would sometimes forget where I had placed my car keys when leaving their house, or repeat a story without realizing I'd already told it. Tiffany meticulously documented every single one of these episodes that she herself deliberately caused. She recorded videos of you acting confused. She photographed you when you appeared disoriented, all to systematically build her case against you. Tears flowed freely down my cheeks. My own daughter-in-law, the supposed mother of my precious grandchildren, had been systematically poisoning me to steal my entire life. Brandon knows absolutely nothing about this, Eleanor. He genuinely believes you're suffering from a degenerative illness because Tiffany has shown him all this fabricated evidence. She has manipulated him so masterfully that he is utterly convinced he's protecting you by removing your independence. That hurt even more, knowing my son wasn't evil, but rather a victim of the same calculating woman who had destroyed me. Brandon truly believed he was doing the right thing. But there are more things you need to know, my love. Things that will change everything. More. How could there possibly be more revelations after all this? Tiffany doesn't merely plan to keep your inheritance. She also plans to eliminate Brandon once she has gained total control of all the assets. My blood ran ice cold. Eliminate Brandon? What exactly did that mean? I found concrete evidence that Tiffany has been researching our family's complete medical history, specifically the heart conditions that affected my father and me. She knows Brandon has inherited a genetic predisposition to heart attacks. Eli had died from a sudden, massive heart attack. His father had suffered the same fate. Brandon had inherited that dangerous predisposition, though until now he had remained perfectly healthy. Tiffany has been systematically purchasing medications that can induce serious heart problems if administered in precisely calculated doses. I found them carefully hidden in their house during one of my visits. Tiffany was planning to murder Brandon too. The woman was an absolute monster, worse than I could have ever imagined. Once Brandon dies, quite naturally from a heart attack, Tiffany will inherit absolutely everything as his widow, and the children will be completely under her control. She will have unrestricted access to our entire fortune with no one left to question her. The plan was diabolical in its elegant simplicity. First, eliminate the inconvenient mother-in-law by having her declared incompetent. Then, dispose of the husband once he had served his purpose. Finally, keep all the money and use the children as the perfect cover for her actions. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means the first part of her plan has already succeeded. But I have some very good news for you. Good news? After everything I had just read, it seemed utterly impossible that there could be anything positive in this nightmarish situation. The entire fortune Brandon believes he has inherited consists only of properties and empty bank accounts that I deliberately placed in his name as a decoy. The real fortune, all $28 million of it, is held in accounts and investments that only you know about now. 28 million? I had thought our fortune was $18 million. Eli had been concealing additional substantial assets. In this safe, you will find all the documentation that proves Tiffany is both a fraud and a potential murderer. You will also find the deeds to properties Brandon doesn't even know exist, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and investments that generate approximately $500,000 every single month. My hands trembled violently as I searched through the safe. Indeed, there was a thick manila envelope bursting with documents, deeds to properties in various countries, bank statements displaying dizzying amounts, investment certificates in major international companies. I also left detailed recordings of Tiffany confessing her plans, photographs of the medications she purchased to kill both me and Brandon, and a comprehensive will that leaves everything, absolutely everything, in your name. I found the small voice recorder I had noticed earlier. I turned it on with shaking hands and heard Tiffany's voice speaking with someone on the telephone. Yes, we're almost finished with the old woman. The trial is scheduled for next week. Once Brandon has complete control of everything, we'll initiate the second phase. The medications you obtained for me will work absolutely perfectly. A heart attack during the stress of managing his mother's complicated assets will appear completely natural. The voice was unmistakably Tiffany's, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of conscience, discussing my son's planned death as casually as if she were planning a vacation. More recordings followed. Tiffany laughing cruelly as she described how she had been drugging me during family dinners. Tiffany speaking with the corrupt doctor about exactly which symptoms he should mention in his false testimony. Tiffany planning in meticulous detail how she would spend the millions once Brandon was conveniently dead. The final document you will find, my love, is a letter addressed directly to the FBI. I have compiled all the evidence against Tiffany documenting fraud, attempted murder, and criminal conspiracy. The letter is completely prepared and ready to be mailed. It requires only your signature and the current date. I found the letter. It was addressed to the FBI Atlanta field office, meticulously detailing all of Tiffany's crimes with overwhelming evidence carefully attached. I have also prepared a comprehensive legal strategy to reverse the judgment against you. I have important contacts in the justice system who owe me significant favors. With this evidence, you will not only recover your freedom and all your assets, but Tiffany will go to prison for the rest of her miserable life. My mind began processing everything slowly but clearly. Eli had not only discovered Tiffany's diabolical plans, but he had prepared a complete counteroffensive. He had protected our true fortune, collected incriminating evidence, and provided me with all the necessary tools to destroy the woman who had destroyed my life. But there's something else, my love, something crucial about the children you absolutely need to know. What else could there possibly be about Ethan and Zoe? Tiffany is not the biological mother of the twins. I stopped breathing completely. What did he mean she wasn't their biological mother? I had been present at their birth. I had watched my grandchildren being born. The twins are actually the children of Tiffany's younger sister, a 16-year-old girl who tragically died in a car accident shortly after giving birth. Tiffany adopted the babies and posed as their biological mother to gain more sympathy from Brandon and from us. I remembered when Tiffany had arrived with the newborn twins. She had said the birth was extremely difficult, that she'd suffered complications, which explained why she looked so haggard and exhausted. But now I understood that she had been grieving her sister's death, not recovering from childbirth. The twins' real grandparents live in another city. They are humble, decent people whom Tiffany drove away from the children with vicious lies about them being dangerous drug addicts. They have been desperately searching for their grandchildren for years. Did that mean there was another family who loved my grandchildren just as much as I did? That Tiffany had not only robbed me but them as well? Eleanor, you now hold in your hands the power to save Brandon, to recover the children, and to bring justice for all the devastating damage Tiffany has caused. But you also have the opportunity for something even greater, to reunite those innocent children with their true family. The letter concluded with lines that made me weep harder than I had in years. My love, I know you feel utterly betrayed and destroyed right now, but I want you to know that all of this has happened for a reason. Tiffany chose the wrong family to deceive. She chose a strong, intelligent, and remarkably brave woman who won't surrender without fighting back with everything she has. Now you have everything you need to win this war. Use it wisely. I love you forever, Eli. I remained sitting in that kitchen for hours, reading and rereading every document, listening to every recording over and over again. The magnitude of Tiffany's betrayal was absolutely overwhelming, but so was Eli's meticulous preparation to protect me. My husband had been one step ahead the entire time. While Tiffany believed she was executing the perfect crime, Eli had been quietly documenting every move, every lie, every diabolical plan. But what struck me most profoundly was realizing that Eli had died knowing all of this. He had lived the final years of his life carrying the heavy knowledge that the woman we considered our daughter-in-law was actively planning to destroy our entire family. Why didn't you tell me when you were still alive? I asked his photograph, which I carried in my wallet. We could have faced her together. But deep down I knew the answer. Eli had understood me better than anyone. He knew I would never have believed something so terrible about Tiffany without overwhelming, irrefutable evidence. I would have tried to confront her directly, talk to Brandon, resolve things amicably, and that would have given Tiffany the chance to alter her plans, destroy the evidence, and disappear with the children forever. Now I understood why Eli had been so insistent that we install comprehensive security systems throughout the house. Why he had started storing copies of all important documents in multiple secure locations. Why he had insisted that I learn to independently manage our complex finances. He had known that someday I would be facing this battle completely alone. I picked up the recorder and listened again to Tiffany's chilling conversations. Her cold, emotionless voice planning Brandon's murder filled me with a rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The old man will never suspect a thing when he dies of a heart attack, Tiffany laughed callously. Brandon will be so overwhelmed with stress managing the crazy woman's inheritance that it will be ridiculously easy to induce heart problems. The doctors will say it was genetic, completely inevitable. In another recording, she spoke about the children with horrifying casualness. The twins are absolutely perfect for generating sympathy and pity. Poor little orphans who desperately need stability. No one will ever question me keeping all the money to properly care for them. And when they eventually come of age, well, accidents happen all the time. She was actually planning to harm Ethan and Zoe as well. The woman had absolutely no limits to her malice. But there was one recording that especially caught my attention, Tiffany talking to someone about me specifically. The old woman is proving stronger than I initially thought. She keeps resisting the drugs much better than most people would. But it doesn't really matter anymore. The damage is already done. Brandon is completely convinced she has advanced Alzheimer's. And if she somehow recovers after the trial, the other voice asked nervously. She won't get the chance to recover, because she won't survive long enough. Once she's admitted to the facility, a little unfortunate accident will permanently solve the problem forever. Tiffany had been planning to murder me too. Not just steal my house and take away my precious grandchildren, but eliminate me completely and permanently. I stood up from the chair with a fierce determination I hadn't felt in months. Eli was absolutely right. Tiffany had chosen the wrong family to deceive and destroy. I carefully reviewed all the financial documents Eli had left for me. The sheer amount of hidden properties and investments was absolutely staggering. We owned houses in 3 different countries, substantial shares in multinational corporations, bank accounts that generated millions in interest annually. The mansion Brandon had inherited was valued at $18 million, but it carried a hidden mortgage of $20 million that Eli had secretly taken out. Technically, Brandon had inherited a $2 million debt, not a fortune.